Enotria, the last song, may be delayed a bit on Xbox, but I got to play through this Italian folklore-inspired Soulslike on PC. For roughly 20 hours or so, I found myself entranced by beautiful visuals and music, while feeling a bit opposite about the gameplay. It's a funny thing, balancing difficulty, and sadly I feel like they kinda missed out on most fronts, but still, it's quite pretty, the story is wonderfully weird, and the music is truly fantastic. Let's go over it in this XboxEra review of Enotria, the last song. In a world of wood, you are the maskless one, able to weave your own threads of fate. The opening cinematic tells a tale of godlike figures who fell into ruin, dragging the rest of the world with them. Masks dictate life and what you can achieve. Your character is special in that you were brought to life without one, ready to break the wheels of control for those who have the power. That power is called the Caravaggio. It's a play that has the world stuck in an unnatural stasis, and your goal will be to act as the mask of change and defeat the authors of this horrific play. To do so, you'll have to wield over 30 masks, which dictate various playstyles, such as I hit things without using magic that often, and I hit things occasionally but focus on magic. There are over 100 weapons in my inventory by the end, in what seemed to be about 8 categories, and I had over 40 spells by the time I finished. There are also parry modifiers to further customize your playstyle as well, because yes, this game is pretty heavily built around parrying. There's no blocking here. It is rather generous though, if you are put off, as the timing's lenient and quite often just spamming the left bumper can work. Enotria takes place in a sun-drenched world that felt like southern Italy, with Enotria itself meaning land of grapevines, an ancient Roman name given to southern Italy. There are dimly lit areas, though they tend to be bathed in pretty colors. This is a world where the party was never meant to stop, and it hasn't. Instead, a deadly craze has taken over, and you'll have to fight your way through this gorgeous mess. And that is where things never quite clicked for me. My first impressions of the movement and combat in Enotria weren't the best, and that never really changed throughout my playthrough. It's a fast Souls-like that works on 3 main tenets, the first being your melee, second your spells, which are called lines, and third is your parry. There is a dodge and there is jumping, though I found neither of those to ever really be useful for avoiding hits, because enemies really magnetize on you. The game adopts the standard layout of the right bumper being your quick attack, while the right trigger is your heavy swing. Left bumper is for parrying, and the left trigger is held down to use your face buttons for your 4 spell slots, as well as the right bumper for a big old stomp of magic that can mostly just break stuff in the environment. A difference in Enotria is that you can have 3 different loadouts equipped at any type. In those loadouts, you have your mask type, which gives stat and passive bonuses, a similar roll type, and then up to a number of passive buffs that you unlock from a ridiculously large skill tree. Those go into 4 categories, which break down essentially to you're focusing on melee, survivability, magic damage, and buffing yourself in various ways. In those loadouts, you can also have 2 weapons and a parry gem per with up on the D-pad, letting you swap weapons on the fly. Y is your flask equivalent for healing. And to cap things off, you get a variety of tools that you can use left and right on the D-pad to swap between, and X to use them. Enotria's main combat mechanic that you have to learn to utilize if you want to succeed is that white, aka Caratia, is greater than red, Fuoto, which is greater than the fuchsia color, Viz, which is greater than green, Malano, which itself is greater than white. It's your basic rock, paper, scissors system that utterly dominates most of the game's toughest encounters. If you do not have the right weapon or spells for a boss, you will struggle immensely, and it cuts heavily into allowing you to play the game you want to. Each of these colors has an associated debuff they cause as well, with white being an explosion, green making enemies poisoned, red giving you heal on hit, and fuchsia making the enemies dizzy, which ups some of their damage, but ups their damage taken. I tried the first few early bosses who did have one of these colors associate them without focusing on that mechanic, leveling up my base physical big sword damage as much as possible, and I could barely hurt the purple enemy health bar. Once I got a good red powered weapon and 1 red power magic spell, I one-shot him in like 20 seconds. There were only a handful of bosses that did not have a particular weakness, and those were a ridiculous gear check that forced me to go back and just grind levels before I could finally take them down. The game uses the equivalent of souls, and in most slots you end up needing items to upgrade your gear, which is almost entirely focused on your weaponry and your masks. You'll need a mix of those and your souls to level the masks and the weapons up, and then just the souls for your levels themselves, which are a handful of very familiar base stats. And you will need hundreds of completely random feeling drops to power yourself up. That itemization and where things drop is just confusing, with flask number and efficiency upgrades seemingly scattered at random. The game does have a bonfire equivalent, and using it brings all but boss enemies back to life. Platforming's not always great, and I easily fell off platforms I didn't think I should have, and sometimes the runbacks were atrocious time wasters. The combat itself, the base movement, and the responsiveness of hitting things never felt great. Occasionally, it did feel cool as hell to do a huge spell, at least for a moment, as the boss would ignore it despite taking, say, 10% of their health as damage, and still whack me in the face like nothing had happened. Spells do not operate on a mana system. Instead, it is a line charge system, which you can greatly buff and use spells more often if you focus on leveling them. A lot of boss moves really require precision timing on your parrying, dodging, or jumping, which is the A button, and the game is not really tight enough to support it. Once I did get the hang on customizing my builds to beat certain health bar types, the game wasn't really overly difficult for those fights. It just also wasn't that fun. Thankfully, at least on PC, it has some very pretty environments. The initial outdoor environment after the tutorial in Enotria is a stunning field of sunflowers. I just stood out there staring at it for 5 minutes the first time I saw it, and there are dozens of similarly gorgeous areas that carried this title for me. I was playing maxed out on PC via Steam. I was playing at 4K, 120 FPS, so I have no idea how this is going to run on PlayStation at launch, and no idea whenever it comes to Xbox. Hopefully pretty soon. As it stands though, this is, outside of Lies of P, my favorite looking Soulslike that I have played outside of the From titles. It is matched with a fantastic soundtrack that was varied in its tone and stylings as well. In combat, it would remind me of Hunter Be Hunted from The Witcher 3 soundtrack. It had the energetic tone mixed with female vocals that had me ready to kick some wooden ass. There isn't a ton of voice acting in the title, but what is there is really good. Eventually, you'll have a base of operations in an old theater, and the NPCs that populate that over time, if you find them, tend to repeat themselves a lot, but when it comes down to the actual story stuff, liked it quite a bit. And that area becomes your base for upgrading and various tasks, and as I try to keep things spoiler-free, trust me when I say it is worth looking for any gods mentioned when you first go there. Also, if you ever interact with the main NPC that accompanies you on most of your journey, make sure to stare at the screen, as there was one point where he told me how to get to the second main area, and I didn't realize the game was actually showing images of where to go, and I wasn't looking, nor was I recording it. So I ended up spending an hour trying to figure it out before reaching out to PR for the answer, and hint, sunflower field but go right. Bug-wise, I had no crashes, though I had a ton of issues with the terrain and either getting stuck in it very briefly, or just sliding off of things and randomly falling to my death during platforming. Wrapping things up, Enotria, the last song, is a beautiful, weird tale that almost nailed the gameplay and customization side of being a good Souls-like, and it is by no means a bad game. It's just not one I can easily recommend for all but the most ardent players of the genre.